Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on delivering technical processes for workflow engine execution. If any of the participants cannot hear me, please take a look at the audio settings screenshot displayed on this slide. If any questions come up during the course of the webinar, you can type them up and send them to us at any point. We will go over them at the end, address them if there's time left, and if not, we will follow up with them over email. All participants are listed as anonymous. Only the host and the presenter's name will be made visible. This webinar is going to be recorded, and the link of the recording will be sent via email in case you want to watch it again. Without further ado, let me introduce myself and our presenter for today. My name is Eugenio Loa Cruz. I am a consultant at the BOC Group in the Vienna office. Tom Brennan is part of our global business development team, and he is based in the Dublin office of the BOC. He's a senior consultant and an expert in BPM and EA. Once more, we would like to welcome you to today's webinar. Before we start talking about workflow engine execution, let me give you some background information about our company, as well as some facts and figures. The BOC Group was founded in 1995 as a spin-off of the University of Vienna and is a leading international manufacturer of software tools for globally recognized management approaches. Through constant innovation and improvement of established processes, we ensure the strong continuity of development of our softwares and services. The BOC Group is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, but it spans its operations worldwide through Germany, Spain, Ireland, Greece, Poland, Switzerland, and France. We currently have over 1,000 clients in more than 50 countries. We have over 5,000 projects completed in the last 20 years, and all of our software is done in-house. The BOC Group is represented by two major products, ADONIS focusing on BPM and ADOIT focusing on enterprise architecture. Both products offer comprehensive functionalities related to GRC, which offers methods and mechanisms for the evaluation and analysis of your risk portfolio. Our products can operate both on-premise or as software as a service. In the previous management areas displayed, the BOC Group is not only a tool manufacturer, but also an experienced consulting company. Other than our products, we also offer extensive consulting services and training. If you're interested in any of these topics, please refer to our website for further information. Within our services, you will find under the Business Process Management section, services related to process governance, process measurement and control, and change management. Related to enterprise architecture, you will find things like business and IT alignment, creation of a capability map, and technology portfolio management. And lastly, with our latest module of the GRC, you will find things like establishing an ICS organization or training in risk and control awareness. Different roles and stakeholders from the organization having different responsibilities in regards to process architecture and your repository are able to conduct multiple evaluation and analysis techniques within the tools with the main goal to prepare your company for audits. With our complete repository and our complete meta model, you're able to use a combination of our tools in order to approach BPM, enterprise architecture, and addition this with our GRC module. The preparation and conduct of audits is optimally supported by extensive features of our products. For example, we have our historization, which allows you to track the changes in the history of models and objects in your repository. We also have archiving capabilities, which allow you to keep track of previous or past models. And we have other things such as rights and filters, which allow administrators to decide who will be able to see what within the tools. Our webinars for the 2017 are focused on 6 topics, and today's webinar will be touching on 5 of these topics. If you want to see more of our webinars and events, feel free to log into our website and go to the webinar section where you will find more webinars regarding these topics. Without further ado, let me hand over to my presenter, Tom, so we can get started with this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Eugenio, for the introduction. I would also like to welcome everybody to today's webinar on how to deliver technical processes for workflow engine execution. This subject is not new, so to speak. Processes and their corresponding Workflow engines have been around for a long time, but the topic of automation has gained momentum again in the last few years, particularly in terms of process execution in the so-called process engines. So a special feature is that these engines can both prescribe and process a model process, and there is now the impression that you can reach the executable process just at the push of a button from a regular or a normal business process. But we can now take a look at whether this thesis is actually true today. So from the agenda perspective, we're going to look at executable processes with their IT support. So in order to make a process executable, some IT systems are required. So on the one hand, the IT systems must support the specialist process, but also fit into the overall IT portfolio of a company. So this kind of interplay is the main focus of the first part of today's session. We will then look at executable processes with BPMN, so the business process model and notation. The second part deals with how we can prepare a process to be executed, and then in the end we will look at how we can move from a modeled business-focused process to an executable process based on the Bonitasoft runtime engine together with ADONIS MP. So with the picture on the left, especially in large companies, the IT landscape can often consist of a kind of conglomerate of different applications. Some will have been purchased off the shelf, some will have been developed internally. You may also have kind of legacy systems that are so kind of deeply embedded in the organization that they can be difficult to remove. But there can also be one or even several kind of workflow or process engines required to meet the different requirements that come from your organization. So this inevitably leads to multiple interfaces between existing systems. There's also going to be more and more kind of expectations and initiatives coming from IT, such as digital transformation and services being offered from the cloud. So the business nevertheless kind of looks for more flexibility in order to be able to implement its requirements both quickly and seamlessly. So why here am I talking about kind of executable processes? Again, you need to consider what needs to be done kind of manually or what can be done without IT support, what IT systems really kind of fit your requirements, so whether or not you need a kind of a fully blown ERP system, or if a workflow system where you actually only need a form that can be then sent by email. But these will always depend on the requirements which come from the business. So for kind of a quick turnaround time, your IT department should be able to decide kind of independently, but also remain flexible. So this is actually only possible if it is known which processes are supported by which IT systems, so there has to be some form of kind of business and IT alignment. It's also important to understand the impact of a change on your existing IT system architecture in order to meet the various requirements to actually achieve that business and IT alignment as a kind of a 2B landscape. So if you look at kind of all of the processes within your company, you need to know which processes might be kind of fully implemented in a single tool, or how many will ever be fully supported by IT systems. And this is probably not be quite as many, or even kind of very few, because there's always going to be certain kind of interplay between manual execution as well as interplay between different systems. So whether this is an ERP system, as I said, or a process engine, or custom bespoke software. But what we mean here is that a single tool will never be able to cover kind of all of your requirements or your processes, which would obviously then increase the associated risk if you were relying on just a couple of solutions. So it's therefore kind of all the more important that from the business departments that they can define their processes independently of any kind of IT systems. So whether the process runs in 1, 2, or even 4 different IT systems, or if tomorrow it's going to be supported by a different tool than it is today, it's going to be actually irrelevant from the business perspective. But nevertheless, a common language is going to be required from the kind of business and IT. So let's now take a look at the kind of people who are going to be involved from both sides when it comes to process execution. So just the quote we have there is, we say that it's always going to be tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it was a nail, but that's always not going to be the case. So if we want to support the business with some automated processes, in this case the two worlds are going to meet. So we've got the business view and the technical view. Everyone has their kind of viewpoint, and each person involved has to solve various kind of questions, whether it's to cope with their kind of everyday life or the tasks they have to carry out every day, or whether it's with the implementation. So take, for example, the onboarding of a new employee. So from a technical point of view, it should be clear what you have to do, what resources are involved, what roles are involved, where are the associated risks. So these are more the typical type of questions arising from kind of classical process management and related disciplines like, quality or risk management. But if the process has to be executed, it really must be viewed from a different perspective. So in this case, the kind of IT experts are brought on board. The process is then considered in more detail with regard to our kind of technical questions. So for example, with the onboarding of a new employee, it's no longer enough to just say that an employee screening is going to take place, but you really have to decide whether the screening should be kind of manual or automatic, and what information must be checked in regards to the employee, where should the data come from, what applications are going to be expected or affected. We can also compare this with an example of Google Maps or any other online map. So say, for example, you're planning a trip to Europe. So you're not going to begin your planning by looking at where the hotels or the shops or maybe the petrol stations are. But the first step in the process will be actually deciding what cities you're going to travel to. So if the then route and the kind of trip objectives are both concise and clear, and who is going to be traveling, it's only then you will go into the details, enter the cities you want to visit, and then specify the further details. So you're going to look at maybe where it's going to make sense to stay, what sites you want to see, and so on. So at this stage, you're also going to look for kind of input from experts who maybe have already been there, or maybe people who live there, to get some tips of what to do. So that's just a kind of an example as well, to kind of think of how you begin from the start before you actually add the details, before you actually want to execute and go on your trip. So the further details are then therefore kind of added gradually until the level of detail is sufficient before you actually go on your trip. So the question is, how do we get to this very detailed view, and what does the path look like to do so? So just the agenda, and the participants among you who know BOC a little know that we like to work with established standards. So in this case, we've chosen an approach from the object management group known as the model-driven architecture, where it shows a way to create kind of tool-independent models. And using this approach together with the BPMN modeling standard, we follow a process from the business level of detail through to its execution. So we're going to look at firstly the theory before we go through a more concrete example. So at the business layer, it starts with the modeling of a business process using a process modeling tool. This can, of course, take several iterations, and the process should be prepared and documented together with the experts. And for this purpose, all the information which is important from a kind of a business point of view is therefore recorded. So you can see here in this model, in the view that we have here, that it's typically very simple and clear, and the processes are normally made accessible to many readers within the organization, and therefore should be relatively easy to kind of read through and understand. But from the business view, however, everything is available which is relevant. So we've got the process steps, we can see the various roles involved, what IT systems are used, and we can also include some risks that can occur in the process. But if a process should be or if it's a candidate for execution, it's going to require a more kind of detailed view. So if we think back to the kind of Google Maps example, the planned route is already known, but the kind of more concrete or specific details are actually missing. So what needs to be executed in the runtime engine and supported by IT, and what steps can actually be performed manually. So in the business view of a process, maybe a kind of a post-it note could be attached to the model stating that only if a test is negative, the process may continue. But now we must determine kind of what kind of test should happen, what should happen if the process can continue. And the workflow model must not contain any kind of ambiguous ends and really has to be logically correct in order to be executed further down the line. So here is an example from the previous slide, just changed slightly to include the workflow graph. So the green bordered area here shows the process which really defines the kind of framework for execution in the process engine. In the top section, you see still the kind of pure business process, which actually triggers the communication with the process engine. So this indicates that other process participants can, of course, be controlled from these process interactions by passing messages back and forth with the execution environment. So this view is then kind of coordinated from a organizational perspective between the business and the IT, so that the processes that are going to be supported by a system and need to have the interaction or the communication between both business and IT. So regardless of whether the system is going to be a kind of a large ERP system or just a simple workflow engine at the end. So, and obviously during the course of preparations with requirements such as the required data, what kind of user interfaces are needed, what business rules need to be followed, may also be kind of derived. So from this point onwards, we are already kind of very much moving towards a kind of a standard implementation project, but the process model itself at this time is not yet kind of executable. So we still need to add further details to the workflow graph for it to actually move towards the execution layer. So to actually make the model executable, it's then going to be passed on to the process engine, and then the process is implemented based on the requirements that have been discussed between both the business and the IT team. And the process needs to be extended to include the technical details. You need to know what interfaces will need to be programmed to kind of access existing systems. We need to know if any kind of schedulers need to be created to start processes automatically. We need to know if there's maybe kind of what systems, like a HR system, to actually read user data. So these are the kind of things that need to be considered here when we're moving more towards the kind of execution graph. And then the final kind of executable process model can also be returned to the tool independent environment, where it's always going to be, again, kind of available for kind of future changes or future requirements, or, you know, for maybe a business meeting where maybe there's going to be some re-specification both on the business side and also from the IT side. So it's possible to reroute the executable process back into the kind of modeling environment in order for changes to take place. So here at the execution graph, we see the process framework, which has been agreed with the business. It's going to remain more or less in the execution environment, but there may be some changes. So there could be some kind of automatic checks which are going to be triggered in a third-party system, which aren't really relevant for the business, but the main focus here is on the kind of integration and connection to the existing systems that are already there. So yeah, the kind of data connections, as I said, what kind of programming is required, especially in terms of designing of the user face for a kind of a nice user experience, what forms need to be defined, and so on. So this is really moving from the business layer right down to the execution graph and what the runtime system will actually present at the end to the end user. Okay, so back to the kind of original kind of thesis that we set at the beginning. So can an executable process be created just at the push of a button? This has obviously been answered. So at the moment, we are not yet really ready to be able to kind of implement a modeled process at the push of a button, but we're definitely kind of on the right path in terms of alignment between business and IT. So now we're going to just move on and take a look at a kind of a more concrete example, again just using slides. So as I mentioned, BOC, we like to work with standards, and we're also actively involved in the kind of international market, and we are involved in the BPMN Model Interchange Working Group, where BOC have been able to kind of prove more and more that the exchange of models between different tools is possible. If you're interested, you can take a look at the latest recording from the last working group session, which was held here on the 5th of June. And the link to the YouTube video here is also available here in the slide. So yeah, more than 10 tools of exchange models based on the kind of ADO Money Bank example that we use as part of our kind of demonstration environment for the tools that we provide, like ADONIS and ADO IT. And today we're going to just look at an example using some slides as just a small part of the work that has been done collaboratively between the various kind of companies that you see up here in the top of the slide. So, okay, so yeah, as I said, we're going to look today at a process about onboarding a new employee. So with ADONIS MP, which we've considered to be the more kind of complete process management tool, and then the process engine of a third-party free open source tool from Bonita Soft. So the example process is going to be onboarding a new employee, where using kind of part of the payroll process as an example, where basically a new employee is hired, and his or her data needs to be firstly validated, and then it's finally pushed forward and included into the payroll database. Okay, so again here we're following the procedure that we've already seen earlier in the slides, and start with the usual kind of business process, which here it's still a relatively simple process. It starts as the kind of payroll department are made aware that a new person is hired, but the information therefore has to be validated, but the data seems to come from a system, as you can see here. But we do not know at this stage what source of information we're talking about, or if it's already in an actual previous system, or if it's just recorded in an Excel file, for example. Then if there are no kind of open points or open questions, the employee can be included in the payroll system, the accounting system for future salary payments. But if there is some data missing, then there's a manual step that we can see highlighted here to actually clarify the missing information, and perhaps with the hiring department. So, but for the payroll department's perspective, this is all of the information that's important. But if this process is then a candidate for kind of execution and automation, more detailed questions will need to be clarified together with the IT department. So this is the kind of typical business view, but now we can look at the extended process model. So we see here that amongst other things, the involved roles are now recognizable using the kind of pool and lanes concept from BPMN to illustrate who is responsible for the individual tasks in the process. So there's already some collaboration between the responsible hiring department and the payroll department here. We can also see there's some kind of IT systems that are supporting some of the payroll department's tasks. And this is actually the kind of part of the process that we would now like to automate. So questions that now need to be kind of answered together with IT, or at least clarified, include where does the employee information come from? So we see in the hiring department, some new employee is reported as being hired. Some information is passed in order to be validated, but we don't know where it comes from or what the data is. We need to know if it's maybe, as I said already, in a system from maybe a preceding process, perhaps in some existing application, or maybe the data here also needs to be newly input. So what kind of data it is and whether or not the data is mandatory. These are the kind of questions we need to clarify between the business and IT team before we can actually submit the information to the payroll system. So at task number 5 here, we can see that an information request is returned back to the hiring department. So how should this information be made available? Should it be provided in a system or possibly by email, which you can see highlighted on the actual task itself? The employee from the hiring department may not continuously be in a specific system and would therefore like to be informed by email when a new request arrives, so that the process can continue. So from here, we are now moving towards a more technical process. In this phase, our kind of user interfaces can also be sketched, and then the data requirements can be defined. So, for example, this information that we see here can also already be defined in ADONIS itself. Here we see an example of our data model, and that's needed to then record the new recruit's information. So, things like the employee's name, what's the start date, and what's his bank account number, how many working hours, is he going to be full-time or part-time. So all of this information can then be required as part of that requirements gathering in order to work together from the business and IT in order to then make the process more executable, so the runtime environment will know what data they can expect. So if the technical requirements are then kind of clarified and finalized, the business process model from ADONIS is then exported and importing into the corresponding workflow engine. So we can import a diagram here in the Bonita BPM open source tool. So we can see that we have our technical view and we have our enhanced business view here. And in order to do the kind of import and export, we're using the BPMN DI or Diagram Interchange function from ADONIS MP. So you see then when the model is imported, all of the elements are kind of adopted as they were defined in ADONIS. So of course this is not enough for the process to actually be executed, but as I said, this is the beginning of a kind of a very typical implementation phase. So at this stage your kind of interface calls can be programmed and standard kind of interfaces of the respective process engines are used, our user interface are designed, and any kind of service calls can be defined if necessary. So there's also the possibility that the process or that the process model could change during this phase as well. So once we include some of the more kind of technical details, we can see here in the model that additional steps have been added to our process. So fully kind of automated steps or process elements that aren't relevant for the hiring department, but they're important from an IT perspective, such as you can see here setting the status of the form after each kind of task or decision. The actual status of the form needs to be reset, so that's more from a kind of a technical perspective, so that the form can be filled out with the new hires details. So you can also see the possibilities from the kind of workflow engine to manage the data model and actually add data attributes to be able to define the kind of forms or user interfaces that will be called up externally for the users to actually input the data about the new employee. So once everything is defined, the process can then be called for execution. So this can also, of course, be done from our ADONIS MP model. So if the corresponding link to the executing process engine is made available, so here in the textual view of our business process in ADONIS MP, we can see here that there's a click here to actually start the process. So once you click here, the result is that the process is then run as an executable kind of workflow triggered by the hiring department. This user interface then gives you the possibility to actually interact with the system, where you can record the new employee data. So we can enter the name, the hourly rate, and the hours per week, and then submit for verification in the payroll. So whether this data will then be stored in the kind of process engine or in an external database is completely dependent on the requirements and the corresponding implementation. So once the information then is submitted to verification to the payroll team, we then see that the task list for our user here, Walter, is actually empty. So he doesn't have any more to-dos. So the workflow has now passed to the payroll department. So if we take a look at what our payroll employee William Job sees, he sees a task list where the data now must be confirmed, in this case by William Job, so then he must actually take the task, so check the box here to select the task and kind of take it to be performed. So in this case, we basically do that to avoid any kind of duplication within the kind of team or the efforts from the kind of payroll performers, and the details are then checked, and if William accepts them, he then just is able to check the box here to say, yeah, these details are correct, and if the details are correct, he can finally click submit to submit the information directly to the payroll system. So that's then we come to the end of our process, but you can see the interaction between the kind of modeling environment and the runtime engine, where the process is then kind of automated using the runtime environment of the Bonitasoft workflow engine. So we've basically come from a kind of our regular business perspective, business process, and moved it to an execution environment involving some kind of additional steps and collaboration again between the business and the IT team. So process execution is only one part of process management. Today we have looked or kind of devoted ourselves more towards just one scenario with a single process, but basically the execution of a process is just done in the process engine, but this process is still part of the overall kind of process architecture of an organization, where not only kind of process execution, but other scenarios can play a role, whether you're looking at kind of an ICS, kind of risk and control management, or maybe it's more tied in with the organizational structure. We were even moving towards more performance management, where you're trying to capture corresponding kind of KPIs in a process. We still have to consider the full picture kind of process management as a whole. As we said, yeah, today we looked at just a single process, where the starting point was really a kind of a purely business-related process to moving to an executable process. We moved from the business process to the workflow graph, which is coordinated then between the business and IT team when the process is actually being planned for execution, and then using the BPMN DI interface, the prepared process was then transferred to the workflow engine to make it kind of executable there. So the way back from the workflow engine, we had also briefly addressed, which may be required for kind of future projects or change requirements in relation to the original process. So to kind of recap as a whole, as at the business layer, the kind of overall kind of process architecture is diverse in terms of the supported scenarios and user requirements, but you still have to have a kind of a focus, as well as a certain kind of stability and also willing support from your IT team. But as we have seen, there's not kind of one tool that will ever be able to cover kind of all of your requirements. We will always have kind of multiple interfaces between IT systems and also between the business and the IT. So with this approach, you really offer the business the greatest kind of possible flexibility, in addition to providing IT with the kind of necessary kind of freedom for the the ever-changing kind of dynamics of a modern kind of IT landscape. So yeah, it's really just the kind of integration between the business layer and then the execution layer, with all of the different options you have in terms of systems that you need to actually run the executable processes. So that's coming to the end of my part of today's webinar. So I would again like to just thank you for attending today, and I will now pass you back to my colleague Eugenio, who's going to wrap things up for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. As a conclusion, I would like to provide you with an overlook of some of our upcoming webinars. As we said earlier, the BOC webinars for 2017 cover the 6 topics that we see at the top. And here are 3 of the upcoming webinars that we have in the next 2 months. First of all, we have the What's New in ADONIS MP 5.0. This is our latest release of ADONIS MP, and in this webinar you will be able to see some of the most important features with our latest release. Then in the middle of the month, we have optimizing business processes, methods, and best practices. So this will be about a webinar where we will go over some of the best practices that we have learned over the last years with our projects. Lastly, our webinar More Than BPMN 2.0, BPMN Fit for Business, Practical, Simple, and Complete. This is referring to our extension to the BPMN notation. This is what we call BPMN Fit for Business, and in this webinar we'll be looking at how this can bring value to your organization. So for a detailed list of information for each of our webinars and agenda, please visit our website at bocgroup.com/webinars. You will be able to find and register into our other webinars. Just a quick reminder, ADONIS MP, our BPMN platform, you will be able to find in our website the 30-day free trial. So in our website you'll be able to find a section called See It, where you're able to do a one-click trial of our tool. In the Test It section you will be able to register for a 30-day free trial, and of course in the Use It section you will be able to register either for a professional version of the Getting Started edition or ask for a quote of our professional editions. Same thing goes for ADOIT. We have a tested version for 30 days of our professional edition of ADOIT, and you can also ask for a quote or for some pricing information right there in our website. If you have not asked any questions yet, feel free to do so. We will get back to you by email with the answers. Should you have any further questions, you can always reach us by phone or by email. And that wraps it up for the day. Once more, on behalf of Tom and myself, thank you for attending today's webinar, and we hope you will be joining us in another webinar soon. Thank you.